Growing up, kids often pointed out the differences in the way my face looked before they ever got to know me. Eventually, those comments became more specific. Why is your face drooping? Why do you look so weird? But these weren't whispers or side comments. They were spoken openly to me long before I even had the words to respond. I was born with 7th cranial nerve palsy, a condition that paralyzes the muscles on one side of my face. For reference, here's what I looked like then. It was around 1st grade when these questions started. They were small, blunt, and delivered with the kind of honesty that really only children can get away with. My smile, the way my face moved looked different. It still does, and for years that difference spoke louder than I ever could, and I even let it pressure me into hiding any strong, visible emotions that would let my palsy show. Even people I thought were my friends would make fun of me, tugging at the corners of their faces and mouths to imitate mine. But I never said anything because, honestly, staying silent felt safer than calling out something that really hurt. For years, I brushed these comments off as kids who didn't understand the weight of their words, but from 1st grade onwards, the comments never really stopped. They just changed shape. What began as playground comments and jokes grew into stares and assumptions, and as I got older, people were less inclined to even ask about my facial palsy. Everything I had been the day before, what I'd said, what I'd done, how I'd shown up in their lives suddenly seemed to disappear. Their eyes didn't land on the person they once knew. They went straight to the difference that they couldn't look past. And I wondered, how could one feature, exterior to who I am, decide which version of me people were willing to see? Years later, when I developed Raynaud's syndrome, a circulation disorder where small blood vessels overreact to cold or stress, this all resurfaced. I walked around school with blood-drained hands, constantly rubbing them together to get warm, which really only made me look more like a supervillain, and I was holding my hand warmers like lifelines. But again came the comments, the stares, the jokes about my pale, dead skin tone, and the shifting colors of my hands. It seemed like the story that people listened to about me shifted from who I was inside to what my skin said on the outside, the same way it had with my facial palsy. But I wasn't protecting myself by staying silent, though. I was just letting that pain go unchallenged. When I think back to the way that facial palsy shaped my childhood or how Raynaud's changed my daily routines, I'm reminded that that experience never stayed in just one part of my life, because people don't experience illnesses in pieces. I'd always loved science, but this was the moment that medicine became something more for me. It became a way to rewrite the story for myself, but also for others. A way to help people be seen beyond their diagnoses. Because real care isn't just about identifying what's broken, it's noticing what's still whole, even when the world doesn't. And that idea reshaped my purpose. It made me realize that the kind of care I wish I had received could be the kind of care that I learned to give to others. I don't want to just restore health, I want to understand the patient that stands in front of me, and not just the condition that they bring with them. I want to be part of the work that helps somebody feel like themselves again. I want to restore the person behind the patient to their rightful place, at the center of their own story. Inside clinics and hospitals, patients are often reduced to a couple words on a chart. The cleft palate repair at 2 o'clock, the cancer patient in room 5. It's a shorthand we've normalized, but it's also the first step in muting the person behind the pathology. I noticed the effects of these differences firsthand when I shadowed a pediatric physical therapist. What I didn't expect, however, was just how much progress would depend on the relationship and not just the exercises. There was one little girl who had come in every time I was there. Her first few sessions were quiet, tense. She did her exercises, but mechanically, almost like she was bracing for failure. But the doctor got to know her favorite games, what made her laugh, and just how much she loved Disney princesses, especially Moana. But what did this change? Well, the doctor worked these details into the exercises, and suddenly the girl was engaged. She was smiling, and she left each session taller than she walked in. But this contrast hit me again when I got official diagnosis of Raynaud's. I'd already spent months dealing with hands that would suddenly drain of color or go numb and ache from the cold. Walking in, I'd felt hopeful that somebody would finally help me make sense of it and offer a solution to the pain that I'd put up with. Instead, the doctors glanced at my hands, called it a textbook case, and told me it would be annoying and uncomfortable, and that was it. No questions about how it affected school or sports or just daily things like carrying stuff outside in the winter. It was simply more generalization through that diagnosis, and I remember sitting there thinking, is that it? Am I really that easy to summarize? I felt like I'd been reduced to a bullet point on a differential diagnosis list, like I wasn't someone sitting there with real worries and real concerns. It was remarkable how much progress depended on whether or not somebody felt acknowledged. Inside the physical therapy clinic, those kids made progress because they felt seen, they felt understood. Here, I'd felt invisible. Same medical system, completely different impact. And in that contrast, I realized something simple but profound. That progress looks different when somebody is acknowledged as a person and not just the case. And that's the heart of this problem, a problem that isn't new and isn't even limited to medicine. Anytime we separate a person from their story, something important goes missing. That interaction becomes routine instead of meaningful. But empathy isn't soft. It isn't a bonus. It's not an add-on. It's the thing that allows people to feel genuinely understood instead of categorized. It shapes whether somebody feels safe trusting somebody across from them, asking a question, or just speaking up for what they have to say. And when somebody does feel genuinely listened to, the entire experience of being helped changes. They show up differently, they present themselves differently, and they believe they matter. And that's what I mean by putting the person behind the patient back into focus. It's remembering that connection isn't extra, it's essential. After all, a diagnosis should never drown out the human who's living with it, and data should never silence that dignity that deserves to be recognized. But this idea reaches far past healthcare, as everybody in this room has been reduced to the thing that somebody noticed first about them instead of who they actually are, whether you knew it then or not. Returning the person behind the patient, though, isn't just good practice, it's good humanity. When we look beyond the surface, we're restoring something deeper than health. We're restoring dignity. And that means we all have a responsibility to the people around us, whether we ever work in healthcare or not. But after all of that I've shared, I don't want you to walk away with a soft or symbolic idea. I want you to walk away with something that you can actually do. First, when you notice someone being talked about like a label or a stereotype, step up. Even your simplest, "Hey, that's not okay," can really bring a person back into focus. Second, when somebody comes to you with something uncomfortable, don't rush to fix it. Sit with them. Ask them a real question or just make space for them. I promise it matters more than you think. Growing up with facial palsy taught me how quickly a diagnosis can speak louder than a person. For years, I thought the goal was to change the way my face looked. But as I learned more, saw more, and imagined myself on the other side of the stethoscope, I realized that the real work wasn't on changing my face. It was on the silence that settles over people when their stories are overshadowed by their conditions. Because silence can be powerful, but it holds those dangers. Sometimes it doesn't just quiet the noise around us, it quiets us. When we choose to restore the person behind the patient, we're practicing healing more than the body. We're healing identity, confidence, and the person who's been waiting to be truly seen. And if you choose to see that person, their fears, their strengths, the dignity beyond their diagnosis, you're not just practicing empathy, we're all practicing healing. And in that moment, nobody stays muted. Not the patient, not their story, not the dignity that belongs at the center of every human life. Thank you.